I was stocking shelves at the grocery store when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end belonged to a lawyer named Mr. Harrison, and his words hit me like a freight train. "I'm calling about your grandfather, William Thornton. I'm sorry to inform you that he passed away last week." My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. Grandpa William. I hadn't spoken to him in over 10 years, not since my parents cut all ties with his side of the family. They'd painted him as a bitter old man who disowned us, but hearing about his death felt like losing a piece of myself I didn't even know still existed. "I understand this is difficult," Mr. Harrison continued, "but there's something important we need to discuss. Your grandfather left you something in his will." I almost laughed. What could he possibly have left me? My parents had always said he was just a stubborn farmer who refused to help when we needed it most. They'd moved us across the country when I was 12, claiming it was for better opportunities, but I always suspected there was more to the story. "What kind of something?" I managed to ask. "His estate, Willowbrook Ranch. Perhaps you could come to my office tomorrow. This isn't really a conversation for the phone." I looked around the grocery store at the fluorescent lights and endless rows of products, at my manager, who was already giving me dirty looks for taking a personal call. My life had been nothing but struggle since I'd aged out of foster care. My parents had essentially abandoned me when I turned 18, claiming I needed to learn independence. "I'll be there," I said. Mr. Harrison's office was nothing like I expected. Located in the heart of the city's financial district, it screamed expensive with its mahogany furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows. I felt completely out of place in my thrift store clothes and worn sneakers. "Please sit down," Mr. Harrison said, gesturing to a leather chair that probably cost more than I made in a month. He was an older gentleman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Before we begin, I want you to know that your grandfather spoke of you often. He never stopped hoping you'd reach out." The words hit harder than I expected. "My parents said he didn't want anything to do with us." Mr. Harrison's expression darkened slightly. "I'm afraid that wasn't accurate. Your grandfather tried many times to contact you, but your parents, well, they had their reasons for keeping you apart." He opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. "Your grandfather owned Willowbrook Ranch, one of the most successful horse breeding operations in the country. The estate spans over 5,000 acres and includes championship bloodlines worth millions." I stared at him blankly. "I don't understand. My parents always said he was just a small-time farmer." "Far from it. The ranch generates approximately $50 million annually. The total value of the estate, including land, horses, facilities, and investments, is approximately $1.2 billion. The room started spinning. "Billion with a B?" "Yes, and he's left it all to you." I couldn't breathe. This had to be some kind of mistake. People like me didn't inherit billion-dollar estates. I was nobody, just a kid who'd been shuffled through foster care after my parents decided I was too much trouble. "There's more," Mr. Harrison continued. "He's also left detailed letters explaining everything." Mr. Harrison handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in shaky handwriting, my grandfather's final words to me. I opened it with trembling fingers, and his voice seemed to echo from the pages. "My dear grandchild, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you finally know the truth about our family. I want you to understand that not a day passed without me thinking of you. Your parents told you I abandoned the family, but the reality is quite different. When your father married your mother, I welcomed her with open arms, but she had different ideas about what our family should be. She wanted access to the ranch's wealth without understanding the responsibility that comes with it. When I refused to simply hand over money for their get-rich-quick schemes, they turned you against me. The final break came when they demanded I change my will to leave everything to them instead of you. They said you were too young to understand the value of hard work, that you'd squander everything I'd built. When I refused, they took you away. I hired private investigators to keep track of you over the years. I know about the foster homes, the struggles, the way they abandoned you when you needed them most. I wanted to intervene, but my lawyers advised that any contact could be seen as harassment, given the restraining order your parents filed. You deserve to know that none of this was your fault. You were a child caught in the middle of adult greed and manipulation. The ranch is yours now, as it always should have been. But more than that, you're inheriting a legacy of hard work, integrity, and love for the land. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't deserve this. All my love, Grandpa William. I wiped tears from my eyes as I finished reading. Everything I'd believed about my family was a lie. The drive to Willowbrook Ranch took 3 hours, winding through countryside I barely remembered from childhood. As we crested a hill, the estate spread out before me like something from a movie. Rolling green pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with magnificent horses grazing peacefully. The main house was a sprawling colonial mansion with white columns and wraparound porches. "Welcome home," Mr. Harrison said softly. The ranch manager, a weathered man named Tom Bradley, met us at the main gate. He'd worked for my grandfather for over 20 years and knew every inch of the property. "Your grandfather talked about you constantly," Tom said as we drove through the grounds. "He always said you'd come back someday." We passed state-of-the-art stables, housing some of the most beautiful horses I'd ever seen. Arabian stallions, thoroughbred mares, and championship bloodlines that commanded hundreds of thousands of dollars each. The breeding operation was massive, with veterinary facilities, training tracks, and pastures that seemed to go on forever. "This is Midnight's legacy," Tom said, stopping at a paddock where a magnificent black stallion grazed. "He's worth about $2 million and has sired some of the most successful racehorses in the country." I stared at the horse in amazement. $2 million. I'd never even seen that much money, let alone owned something worth that amount. The main house was equally impressive. 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a library filled with books about horses and ranching, and a study that had clearly been my grandfather's sanctuary. Photos covered the walls, pictures of prize-winning horses, championship ribbons, and scattered throughout them all, pictures of me as a child. He'd never forgotten me. Even when I thought I was completely alone in the world, he'd been watching over me. The first few weeks at Willowbrook were overwhelming. I'd gone from living in a tiny studio apartment and working minimum wage to overseeing a billion-dollar operation. Tom became my guide, patiently teaching me about horse breeding, ranch management, and the intricate business of maintaining such a massive enterprise. "Your grandfather always said the horses come first," Tom explained as we walked through the stables one morning. "Everything else, the money, the prestige, the awards, that's all secondary. If you take care of the horses, everything else follows." I was learning to ride again, something I'd loved as a child but hadn't done in years. The horses seemed to sense my inexperience, but they were patient with me. There was something magical about being in the saddle at sunrise, watching the mist rise from the pastures as the ranch came alive for another day. The business side was more challenging. I spent hours with accountants and managers, learning about breeding contracts, stud fees, and the complex financial arrangements that kept the ranch profitable. The numbers were staggering. Some horses commanded stud fees of over $100,000, and the waiting lists for breeding rights stretched years into the future. But it wasn't just about the money. I was beginning to understand what my grandfather had tried to preserve. This wasn't just a business, it was a legacy of excellence, a commitment to breeding the finest horses in the world. Every decision had to be made with the long-term health and success of the bloodlines in mind. I found myself falling in love with the life, despite its challenges. For the first time since childhood, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The ranch hands accepted me gradually, seeing that I was willing to work hard and learn. The horses responded to my growing confidence. This was home. I was in the stables grooming one of the mares when Tom appeared at my shoulder, his expression troubled. "We've got visitors at the main gate," he said quietly. "Your parents. They've got several cars with them, looks like lawyers." My blood ran cold. I hadn't spoken to my parents in over 2 years, not since they'd made it clear that I was on my own. The last conversation had been brutal, them telling me I needed to stop being a burden and figure out my own life. "What do they want?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "They're demanding to see you. Said something about family business that needs to be settled." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I'd known this moment would come eventually. There was no way they'd let $1 billion inheritance go without a fight. "Let them in," I said, "but make sure the security cameras are recording everything." 20 minutes later, I watched from the main house windows as a convoy of expensive cars wound up the driveway. My parents stepped out of a black Mercedes, followed by 3 men in expensive suits carrying briefcases. My mother looked exactly the same, perfectly styled hair, designer clothes, the cold expression I remembered so well. My father had aged more, his hair grayer, but his arrogant posture was unchanged. They approached the front door like they owned the place, which I suppose they thought they did. I opened the door before they could knock, standing in the doorway with my arms crossed. "Hello, Mother, Father." My mother's eyes swept over me dismissively, taking in my work clothes and the dirt under my fingernails. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. Playing farmer now, are we?" The venom in her voice was immediate and familiar. Some things never changed. "We need to talk," my father said, pushing past me into the house without invitation. "This whole situation is ridiculous." I followed them into the living room, where they'd already made themselves comfortable on my grandfather's furniture. The lawyers arranged themselves behind them like a wall of expensive suits. "Nice place," my mother said, looking around with calculating eyes. "Though it's clearly too much for someone your age to handle properly." "I'm managing just fine," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. One of the lawyers, a sharp-faced woman with silver hair, opened her briefcase. "Let's cut to the chase. I'm Margaret Whitfield, representing your parents. We're here to discuss the inheritance situation." "What's to discuss? Grandpa left the ranch to me." My father laughed bitterly. "That senile old man didn't know what he was doing. You can't seriously think you're capable of running $1 billion operation. I've been doing it for 6 weeks now. Playing dress-up isn't the same as actual management," my mother snapped. "You have no education, no experience, no understanding of what this kind of responsibility requires." Ms. Whitfield leaned forward. "Your parents are prepared to offer you a generous settlement, $5 million cash in exchange for signing over the estate to them. It's far more money than someone in your position could ever hope to see otherwise." I stared at them in disbelief. "You want me to give up $1 billion inheritance for $5 million? "It's a fair offer," my father said. "More than fair, considering you'd probably run the place into the ground within a year anyway." Ooh, the casual cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and they were treating me like an obstacle to be removed. "The answer is no," I said firmly. My mother's mask slipped, revealing the cold fury underneath. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me, you abandoned me." "We didn't abandon you," my father said, his voice rising. "We tried to teach you independence." "There's a difference. Independence. You threw me out the day I turned 18 with nothing but the clothes on my back." My mother waved dismissively. "You were an adult. It was time you learned to take care of yourself instead of expecting handouts." Handouts? I was your child. Miss Whitfield cleared her throat. Perhaps we should focus on the legal matters at hand. Your parents have grounds to contest the will. Your grandfather was elderly, possibly suffering from diminished capacity when he made these decisions. I felt Tom's presence behind me before I saw him. He'd entered quietly, along with Mr. Harrison, who must have driven out when he heard about the confrontation. Actually, Mr. Harrison said, setting his own briefcase on the coffee table, Mr. Thornton was examined by 3 independent physicians in the months before his death. All confirmed he was of sound mind and fully capable of making legal decisions. Miss Whitfield's confident expression faltered slightly. That doesn't address the issue of undue influence. A young person with no family support, suddenly inheriting such wealth, it raises questions about manipulation. The only manipulation here, Mr. Harrison replied coolly, was your client's systematic alienation of their child from their grandfather. I have documentation of every attempt Mr. Thornton made to contact his grandchild, all blocked by your clients. Tom stepped forward. I've got something to say about this. My father turned to him with obvious disdain. I don't think the hired help needs to be part of this conversation. The hired help, Tom said evenly, has been recording every conversation that's happened on this property for the past 20 years. Security cameras, audio recordings, everything, including the conversation you had with Mr. Thornton 5 years ago. The color drained from my mother's face. Tom walked to my grandfather's old desk and pulled out a small digital recorder. Your grandfather kept detailed records of everything, especially after you folks started making threats. He pressed play, and suddenly my grandfather's voice filled the room, strong and clear despite his age. The conversation was from 5 years ago, based on the date stamp. William, you're being unreasonable. We're family. That was my father's voice, younger, but just as demanding. Family doesn't threaten to destroy each other, my grandfather replied. You've already taken my grandchild away from me. What more do you want? We want what's rightfully ours. This ranch should come to us, not some kid who doesn't even know we exist anymore. That's your doing, not mine. You've poisoned that child against me with your lies. My mother's voice came through clearly. The kid is a burden anyway. Always has been. We did you a favor by cutting contact. Now do us a favor and change your will. Never. Everything I've built is for my grandchild. You've already proven you can't be trusted with family, let alone with this legacy. You'll regret this, old man. We'll make sure of it. The recording ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Hearing my mother call me a burden so casually, so cruelly, was devastating, even though I'd suspected it for years. There are dozens of these recordings, Tom said quietly. Phone calls, in-person visits, threats, demands for money. Your grandfather documented everything because he knew this day would come. Ms. Whitfield was frantically whispering with my parents, but I could see the defeat in their postures. The recording had destroyed any sympathy they might have garnered from a judge. Mr. Harrison opened his briefcase. I also have copies of the restraining order your clients filed to prevent Mr. Thornton from contacting his grandchild, along with evidence that they lied to obtain it. My father stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're not going to sit here and be ambushed. You're not being ambushed, I said, finding my voice again. You're being held accountable for the first time in your lives. My mother turned on me with vicious fury. You think you're so smart now, don't you? Living in this big house, playing with expensive horses. But you're still the same worthless child you always were. Her words hit their intended target, but something had changed in me over the past weeks. I wasn't the scared, abandoned teenager anymore. I was the owner of Willowbrook Ranch, the inheritor of my grandfather's legacy, and I had people who believed in me. You're right about one thing, I said calmly. I am the same person I always was. Someone who values loyalty, hard work, and treating people with respect. Qualities you never bothered to teach me because you don't possess them yourselves. How dare you, my father started. How dare I what? Tell the truth. You abandoned your child, lied about your own father, and now you're trying to steal an inheritance that was never meant for you. Tom stepped closer, his presence reassuring. I think it's time for these folks to leave. Ms. Whitfield gathered her papers hastily. This isn't over. We'll be filing challenges to the will, investigating the circumstances of the inheritance. Feel free, Mr. Harrison said. I welcome the scrutiny. It will only further demonstrate your client's pattern of manipulation and greed. My parents headed for the door, but my mother turned back one last time. You'll fail, she said with cold certainty. You don't have what it takes to run this place. When you do, don't come crawling back to us. I wouldn't dream of it, I replied. After they left, I sank into my grandfather's favorite chair, emotionally drained. Tom sat across from me, his weathered face kind but serious. You okay, kid? I nodded, though I wasn't sure that was entirely true. Did he really record everything? Your grandfather was a smart man. He knew they'd try something like this eventually. The weeks following my parents' visit were challenging, but transformative. Their legal challenges were quickly dismissed once the courts reviewed the evidence, but their words had planted seeds of doubt. Was I really capable of running such a massive operation? Did I deserve this inheritance? I threw myself into learning everything I could about the ranch. I spent hours with the veterinarians, understanding the complexities of horse breeding and genetics. I studied bloodlines that went back generations, learning to recognize the subtle traits that made certain horses exceptional. The financial side was equally complex, but I was determined to master it. I worked with accountants to understand profit margins, breeding contracts, and long-term investment strategies. The ranch wasn't just about the horses. It was a sophisticated business empire that required careful management. But it was the horses themselves that truly captured my heart. Each one had a distinct personality, and I began to understand what my grandfather had meant about putting them first. Midnight's Legacy, the $2 million stallion, was actually gentle and playful despite his imposing size. The mares were protective mothers who would do anything for their foals. I started spending my mornings in the stables, not just as the owner, but as someone who genuinely cared about each animal's well-being. The ranch hands noticed the change in me, and their respect grew as they saw my commitment. Your grandfather would be proud, Tom told me one evening as we watched the sunset from the main house porch. You've got his instincts for this work. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just playing a role, I admitted, like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. Tom was quiet for a moment. You know what your grandfather used to say? The land doesn't care about your past. It only cares about what you're willing to give it today. You're not pretending to be anything. You're becoming who you were always meant to be. 6 months into my ownership of Willowbrook Ranch, I faced my first major business decision. A wealthy investor from Dubai wanted to purchase Midnight's Legacy for $15 million, more than 7 times what the horse was currently worth. It was an astronomical offer that would provide immediate capital for ranch improvements and expansion. The ranch's board of advisors, established by my grandfather, was split on the decision. Half argued that the offer was too good to refuse, while the others insisted that selling our prize stallion would damage the ranch's breeding program for generations. I spent sleepless nights weighing the options. $15 million could fund improvements to the facilities, allow us to purchase new bloodlines, and provide financial security for years to come. But Midnight's Legacy wasn't just valuable for his monetary worth. He was the cornerstone of our breeding program, with offspring that consistently performed at the highest levels. I found myself in my grandfather's study, surrounded by photos of championship horses and ribbons won over decades of careful breeding. A letter I'd missed before was tucked behind one of the frames, addressed to me in his familiar handwriting. The hardest decisions you'll face won't be about money, they'll be about legacy. When someone offers you a fortune for something irreplaceable, remember that some things are worth more than their price tag. The ranch's reputation was built on never compromising our standards for short-term gain. The next morning, I called the investor and declined his offer. The decision felt right in my bones, even though it meant turning down more money than I'd ever imagined possessing. Tom smiled when I told him, "Your grandfather turned down a similar offer for Midnight's Legacy's father 20 years ago. Said some horses are too important to sell." That afternoon, I received a call from a respected breeding operation in Kentucky. They wanted to negotiate a partnership that would allow Midnight's Legacy to remain at Willowbrook while expanding our breeding program through shared bloodlines and expertise. Sometimes the right decision opens doors you never knew existed. As my first year at Willowbrook Ranch drew to a close, I realized I wasn't just maintaining my grandfather's legacy, I was building something new. The partnership with the Kentucky operation had led to opportunities I'd never imagined. We were developing a program to rescue and rehabilitate retired racehorses, giving them new purpose as therapy animals and breeding stock. The program was personal for me. Like these horses, I'd been discarded by the people who should have cared for me most. But with patience, care, and the right environment, both the horses and I were discovering our true potential. I'd also started a scholarship program for young people aging out of foster care, providing them with opportunities to learn about ranch management, veterinary care, and equine therapy. The first group of scholarship recipients had arrived last month, and watching them discover their own capabilities reminded me of my own journey. "You're changing this place," Tom observed, as we watched the scholarship students working with the therapy horses. "Your grandfather built something amazing, but you're making it mean something more." The ranch was more profitable than ever, but profit wasn't the only measure of success anymore. We were creating opportunities, healing trauma, and proving that sometimes the best way to honor a legacy is to expand it. My parents had been wrong about many things, but they'd been especially wrong about my capacity for responsibility. I wasn't just managing a billion-dollar operation, I was stewarding something far more valuable: hope, healing, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance. The legal challenges had been definitively settled months ago, with the court's ruling that my inheritance was completely legitimate and that my parents had no claim to the estate. They'd disappeared from my life as suddenly as they'd reappeared, presumably to find other opportunities to exploit. I didn't miss them. The family I'd built at Willowbrook, Tom, the ranch hands, the scholarship students, even the horses themselves, was more loving and supportive than my biological family had ever been. Standing on the front porch of the main house as the sun set over Willowbrook Ranch, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been stocking shelves in a grocery store, living paycheck to paycheck with no family and no prospects. Today, I was the owner of one of the most successful horse breeding operations in the world, surrounded by people who'd become my chosen family. The ranch had taught me that legacy isn't just about what you inherit. It's about what you do with what you're given. My grandfather had left me more than money and property. He'd left me the opportunity to become the person I was meant to be. Midnight's Legacy grazed peacefully in the pasture nearest the house, his coat gleaming in the golden light. His offspring were already showing promise on racetracks around the world, carrying forward the bloodlines my grandfather had spent decades perfecting. But more than that, they were part of a larger story about resilience, excellence, and the power of never giving up on what matters most. The scholarship students were finishing their evening chores, their laughter carrying across the grounds. Tomorrow, we'd welcome a new group of retired racehorses to our rehabilitation program. Next month, we'd host our first annual fundraiser for foster care organizations. The ranch was alive with purpose and possibility. I thought about my parents sometimes, wondering if they ever regretted their choices. But mostly, I felt grateful for the path that had led me here. Their abandonment had been devastating at the time, but it had also freed me to discover who I really was without their toxic influence. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I made my way inside to my grandfather's study, my study now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight I was simply grateful to be home. The ranch had given me everything I'd never known I was missing: purpose, family, and the unshakable knowledge that I belonged somewhere in this world. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me that you've taken this journey with me through the ups and downs of discovering my inheritance and finding my true family at Willowbrook Ranch. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from. Are you in a bustling city, a small town, or maybe even on a ranch like mine? Your stories and perspectives always inspire me to keep sharing. And if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel. There are so many more stories to tell, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Until next time, remember that sometimes the family that chooses you is the one that matters most.